America has already secretly had a woman president, and nobody knows about it. She was never elected, never sworn into office, yet she absolutely led the executive branch of the United States government for over a year. This secret was hidden from everyone in government, from the entire country, and from the whole world. But it's time that the truth comes out. While she served in the office of the president, there was an elaborate cover-up to hide this fact, complete with blocking access to the Oval Office, dummy documents, political impersonation, propped-up presidential parades, staged photo ops, misinformation, and outright lies to Congress, the press, and the American people. She fooled everyone, and completely got away with it. Who could have orchestrated such an elaborate plot to secretly seize the power of the presidency at a time when no one would have ever elected her? If you're thinking of someone with the last name of Clinton or Roosevelt, you're not even close. The First Lady we're talking about actually led the government as chief executive of the United States, when her husband was completely unable to serve in the role. We're talking about Edith Galt Wilson, the second wife of President Woodrow Wilson. Her story is almost lost to history, but she was an incredible person. Behind her sweet and demure temperament, she reshaped the position of First Lady. And then, when her husband fell ill, she secretly seized power, manipulated the government, and fulfilled the role of President of the United States. How did she do it? How did she keep this secret from an entire nation? And why? Was Edith Wilson a villain, or was she a woman desperately trying to hold a crumbling country together? Was she a power-hungry opportunist, or was she doing what she felt she had to do? Edith Wilson held the fate of the United States in her hands, and history barely remembers her name. This is the incredible story of how the United States got its first woman president, without ever knowing it. From Virginia Belle to White House Bride. To dig into this tale, let's go back to October 15th, 1872, in Wytheville, Virginia. That's where Edith Bowling Galt was born, a little girl with big dreams and a family line connected to Thomas Jefferson, Martha Washington, Robert E. Lee, and even Pocahontas. But having a famous family didn't mean that she lived a life of luxury. Growing up in the South after the Civil War, her family faced tough times. Edith was one of 9 kids, raised in a busy home full of relatives, a small version of Southern society where old ways clashed with new ideas. Her childhood was a mix of lessons from her grandmother about self-worth and confidence, balanced with her mother's teachings on being a proper Southern lady. But Edith didn't let society's rules hold her back. In 1890, she left her small town for Washington, D.C., where she became a stylish socialite. She caught the eye of Norman Galt, a successful jeweler, and they quickly fell in love. They had a whirlwind romance, and Edith enjoyed a life of luxury. Then tragedy struck in 1908 when Norman passed away unexpectedly, leaving Edith a widow at 36. But this loss changed everything. Edith inherited Norman's wealth and jewelry business, which was rare for a woman back then. Now, she was a businesswoman with money and freedom. She could travel, follow her passions, and even got her driver's license, becoming one of the first women in Washington to do so. She became a respected member of society, but she kept her heart guarded against love. Meanwhile, the political landscape was shifting. Woodrow Wilson became president in 1912. But things got tragic when his first wife, Ellen, died in 1914, leaving him sad and lonely. Fortunately for them both, fate brought Edith and Woodrow together. Their friend, Dr. Cary Grayson, worried about Wilson's sadness, arranged a tea party at the White House. Edith was there, and they fell in love. They dated with lots of love letters and secret meetings. But Edith wasn't sure about making things too serious. She loved her freedom and wasn't ready to give it up. Woodrow kept asking her out and showing her he cared, and eventually, she gave in. Just 5 weeks after they first met, he asked her to marry him. At first, she said no, but as they spent more time together, she got more interested. She ended up saying yes by the fall of 1915 to become the president's wife. Their wedding was simple, held at her home in DuPont Circle. She kept things as normal as possible, even though she was entering the abnormal world of politics. The newlyweds went on a busy campaign tour in 1916, with Edith winning over voters and dignitaries. Her presence made Woodrow seem kinder, and she became popular with the public. Their election win made Edith the official First Lady, but World War I in 1917 put her to the test in surprising ways. She took on her wartime duties with energy, encouraging people to save resources, volunteering, and even having sheep graze on the White House lawn to help the war effort, to save on manpower. But Edith's biggest challenge to date came when Woodrow insisted on going to the Paris Peace Conference in 1918. Breaking tradition, she went with him, the First Lady to travel overseas while her husband was in office. In Paris, Edith was more than just a symbol. She was Woodrow's close advisor and translator, her French skills proving very useful. She smoothed over diplomatic issues with her charm and wit, making her a key part of the American team. This unusual role on the world stage hinted at the dramatic events to come. Edith was proving she was much more than just a First Lady. She was smart, strong, and ambitious, qualities that would soon be tested in a way no one could have predicted. But even as they celebrated their successes, trouble was brewing, a storm that would change everything. Woodrow's massive health crisis. 1918 brought a terrible flu pandemic. Woodrow, already worn out from the war and the tough peace talks, got sick. We don't know exactly what he had, but it made him weak and vulnerable. Even after he got better, the long hours and stress of the negotiations took their toll on his already shaky health. Back in the US, in the summer of 1919, Woodrow faced another fight, getting the Senate to agree to the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, which would officially end World War I and create a global organization to keep the peace forever. The Republicans, who controlled Congress, were dead set against him, led by his biggest rival, Henry Cabot Lodge. Lodge didn't want the US to be forced to fight wars alongside other League nations if they were attacked. He thought Congress should decide whether to go to war, not a treaty. Woodrow was determined to pass the treaty. This was to be his legacy as president. He believed this agreement was the key to preventing future wars and creating world peace. After all, they had just fought and won the war to end all wars. Ignoring pleas from Edith, his doctor, and his secretary, Woodrow went on a huge tour across the country to get people to support the treaty. He traveled over 8,000 miles and gave 40 passionate speeches in just 3 weeks. He was determined to bring about world peace through the League of Nations. But the constant traveling and the summer heat were too much for his already weak health. He got terrible headaches that even made him go blind for a bit. He couldn't sleep on the bumpy train. The man was a shadow of his former self. Then, in September 1919, near Pueblo, Colorado, disaster struck. After giving one of the most powerful speeches of his life, President Wilson collapsed on the train. His body just couldn't take it anymore. Edith and Dr. Grayson begged Woodrow to stop the tour. But he said, "The League of Nations is in danger right now, and if it fails, the world will be in trouble. I can't put my own safety above my duty." He thought world peace depended on him, so he pushed himself until he broke. The tour was cut short, and they rushed back to Washington. The White House tried to cover it up, saying he was just tired. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. On October 2nd, 1919, Woodrow had a major stroke that paralyzed his left side. He was close to death for days. Even after the worst was over, he was never the same. What we now know is that wasn't his first stroke. It was his fourth. This was not known at the time, but his doctor's private notes now tell us that Wilson remained paralyzed and partially blind in his right eye. His speech was slurred, his thinking and moods were affected, and he was extremely weak. He struggled to sign his own name, was completely bedridden, and needed help with all the activities of daily life, including eating. He was completely incapacitated and unable to serve in the office of the president. And he got even sicker a few weeks later when he suffered a urinary tract infection that nearly killed him once again. The country was in a mess. The president was out of commission, and the world was teetering on the edge. In this moment of crisis, Edith Wilson took charge. Seeing her husband so helpless, Edith made a choice that would change history. She decided to hide the truth from everyone, to protect the presidency, and to secretly take over the reins of power. This was the start of a time of secrets and lies, a time that would push the limits of power, loyalty, and ambition. Edith Wilson, the woman who had once avoided the political spotlight, was about to step into it, becoming the secret president in a time of national emergency. The secret presidency. Now, you have to remember, back then the world had just gone through what they called the War to End All Wars, which we now know as World War I. Woodrow Wilson was fighting hard to create the League of Nations, an organization aimed at stopping all future wars. He felt this was his life's mission, and it's why he pushed himself so hard, leading to his stroke. Edith, in her own words, tells us that after the stroke, doctors warned her that any stress, bad news, or even getting out of bed for too long could kill Woodrow. Basically, he couldn't do his job as president anymore. But at the same time, his whole reason for living was to make the League of Nations happen and end all wars. If he quit as president, he might lose his will to live, and the chance for world peace could be gone. Edith faced a tough choice. Should she trust the vice president, who wasn't really qualified to handle this tricky situation? Or should she take matters into her own hands? Edith decided to take charge. She stepped in and became the President of the United States, even though Woodrow was paralyzed and not thinking clearly. To protect Woodrow's image and the presidency, she told everyone she was just helping him. But secret doctor's notes we found since then show how bad Woodrow's condition really was, proving that Edith made lots of decisions on her own. This was a huge secret, and a risky one. At the time, the US Constitution wasn't clear about what to do if the president couldn't do his job. The cabinet met to try to decide what to do, but Woodrow's dear friend and his doctor, Cary Grayson, refused to admit that the president was incapacitated. Edith stepped in instead, becoming the first woman to lead the country, even if it was in secret. Only Dr. Grayson and Joe Tumulty, his chief of staff, knew the truth about his condition. Edith was very careful about who could see the president. Almost nobody was allowed in, except for the doctor. If someone needed something from the president, they had to write it down, usually addressing the note to Edith. She decided what the president saw and what information reached him. She handled everything else herself. This went on for months, eventually extending to nearly a year and a half. This was a very unusual situation, and people started to get suspicious. They wondered if Edith was secretly running the country. The whispers turned into accusations, with critics calling it an invisible presidency, saying an unelected woman was grabbing power. Edith, who was always a private person, never publicly responded to these claims. Edith went to great lengths to hide Woodrow's illness. She wouldn't even let anyone say the word stroke in the White House. Instead, they said vague things like, he just needed to rest. Edith's actions were extreme. A few months later, people started complaining that they hadn't seen Woodrow in public. So Edith and Dr. Grayson literally propped him up in a car and drove him around town to make it look like he was okay. He couldn't talk or move, but it was enough to quiet some of the rumors, at least for a little while. But the rumors didn't stop. So they even staged an interview with a reporter they knew would be friendly. They planned all the questions beforehand to make sure the president looked good. They even propped him up again for a photo. This was a big lie, and it raises serious questions about what's right and wrong. Yet Edith was determined to protect her husband and his reputation. Her actions show just how far she was willing to go to keep the presidency running and to shield the country from the truth about its leader. Serving America from the shadows. But Edith wasn't just managing appearances. While Woodrow was bedridden, she continued to push his agenda. It was probably Edith who made cabinet appointments during this time, including the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of the Interior, and other high-level positions. When Congress voted to ban alcohol in October 1919, less than a month after Woodrow's stroke, it was Edith who tried to stop it. We now know that Edith was behind Woodrow's veto. She knew that prohibition of alcohol was a big mistake. Unfortunately, Congress overruled her the next day, but she tried her best to save us from ourselves. Edith definitely kept working on Woodrow's biggest goal, the League of Nations. She wanted to create a group of countries that would prevent future wars. Edith made sure this idea stayed important, even writing many of Woodrow's public statements about it for him. Sadly for both of them, too many people in Congress and the press didn't like the League of Nations idea, and Woodrow not being around didn't help. The powerful Senator Henry Cabot Lodge was strongly against the League. He thought it would give other countries too much control over America. But even when Lodge tried to compromise, Edith, speaking for Woodrow, refused to change their plan. When Lodge was close to getting enough votes to pass a changed version of the League, Edith made their supporters stop it. So the United States never joined the League. 9 months later, Warren Harding became president, and he was against the League too. By then, Woodrow was so sick he couldn't even go to the inauguration, and he died a few months later. Edith's actions had big consequences. The League of Nations, without the US, wasn't as strong as it could have been. Some people think this weakness led to World War II happening just 20 years later. Who knows what would have happened if the US had been a partner in stopping Hitler as soon as he became an aggressor? We're still figuring out exactly how much power Edith had during Woodrow's illness. But one thing's for sure, this couple changed the rules during a very important time in American history. Their story makes us think about duty, loyalty, and the limits of power. Did Edith do what she did out of love and wanting to protect her husband's work? Or did she go too far, becoming a leader without being elected? We might never know everything she did, but Edith Wilson's secret presidency is a fascinating part of American history. A story of a woman who had a lot of power but kept it hidden. And America, next time a strong, smart woman runs for president, don't be afraid to vote for her. She just might save the world. Remember, there's already been a woman in that position, and she tried to save us from the huge mistake of the prohibition of alcohol and to bring about world peace. That might have even stopped Hitler in his tracks much earlier. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to our channel for more true conspiracy stories.